The United States has just officially turned gold into a weapon in the trade war, and the shockwaves from this decision are shaking the global financial system. In mid-August 2025, only days after the Swiss president failed in an attempt to secure a tax reduction deal in Washington, Trump's White House stunned markets by imposing a 39% tariff on imported 1-carat gold bars. The blow was aimed squarely at Switzerland, the world's largest gold refiner processing nearly 2 to 3 of global supply. The August 12th announcement was not merely about gold. It carried a cold message. No product is beyond the reach of the new tariff regime. Just 5 days later, on August 17th, the effects erupted from New York to Zurich, from Dubai to Ottawa. Traders scrambled to adapt while policymakers were forced to recalculate their strategies. This was not just another headline. It marked a turning point with the potential to reshape the balance of global trade and, more worrisome still, what comes next could hit people's wallets far harder than many might expect. The consequences were immediate and severe. Dozens of tons of gold packed in containers at Swiss airports and refineries suddenly became unsellable. Within the first week after the tariff was imposed, the World Gold Council reported that more than 18 tons of gold, valued at over $1.22 billion US, had been stranded mid-shipment. In New York, spot gold prices surged to $3,548 per ounce, creating a rare spread as much as $37 above the London benchmark. Those who believed bullion would remain exempt from trade skirmishes were left stunned. A veteran broker at COMEX admitted, "I've seen market swings before, but I've never witnessed such a massive price gap appear overnight." This upheaval opened the floodgates for speculators while slamming shut opportunities for the jewelry industry, electronics manufacturers, and ETFs. And one thing is clear, this earthquake is not confined to a single tariff. Its roots run much deeper, and the fallout ahead is likely to be far harsher than any forecast suggests. A U.S. Customs directive has now been issued under Tariff Code 7108135. This code applies to imported bullion and is directly subject to the 39% levy. In the past, the most vulnerable products were small coins or non-monetary gold bars. But this time, even standard 1-carat bars refined by renowned Swiss facilities like Valk Kami, Metalor, or PAM Swiss have been caught in the crossfire. The move has delivered an unexpected shock to a supply chain that had run smoothly and predictably for decades. Recent import data underscores the extent of the disruption. In January 2025 alone, the U.S. brought in more than 43 tons of gold, double the country's domestic refining capacity, which sits at roughly 22 tons per month. American buyers had rushed to stockpile ahead of possible policy shifts. Now, those very reserves have become the sole source of supply for the domestic market. Yet, experts warned that this stockpile may last only 6 to 8 weeks. According to forecasts by Goldman Sachs, if the congestion persists through the end of Q3, domestic gold prices could climb another 8 to 10%. This would add further cost pressures on a wide range of sectors heavily reliant on the precious metal, from medical equipment manufacturing to high-tech industries. In Switzerland, the political backlash has been fierce. Economy Minister Karen Keller-Sutter stressed that gold has always been considered a neutral product essential to the global financial system. Turning this precious metal into a tool of trade warfare, she warned, would erode trust not only in bilateral relations, but also in the stability of the entire international marketplace. Major Swiss refiners are now scrambling to divert exports to Dubai, Singapore, or Shanghai, a shift that signals the U.S. is being pushed out of key supply chains. The negative ripple effects are beginning to surface in places few would have expected. Across the border, Canadian officials see this as a stark warning. Gold may not be one of Canada's primary exports to the United States, but this precedent has raised serious concerns. If Washington is willing to slap tariffs on Swiss gold, a sector long regarded as beyond politics, then targeting Canadian aluminium, copper, nickel, or even auto parts becomes entirely plausible. A senior trade official told CBC privately that this episode has altered Ottawa's risk perception. For years, Canada trusted that certain industries would be shielded by the integration mechanisms of the USMCA. That confidence, however, no longer feels secure. The unease extends well beyond government circles, spreading into the small and medium-sized business community. In Sudbury, Ontario, the owner of a mid-sized copper mine told the Globe and Mail that he had invested millions to expand production based on the assumption of growing U.S. demand. But if even gold can no longer be considered a safe zone, why should copper or nickel be any different? Trump's tariff policy makes it clear no commodity is untouchable for Canada. This is clearly just the opening salvo. Farmers and manufacturers who already suffered under tariffs on lumber and steel now fear that strategic minerals may be the next casualties. In the United States, the human impact of the new tariff policy is becoming harder to ignore. In Detroit, a Ford assembly line worker told Reuters, "I don't work directly with gold, but almost every component in the cars we build has some in it. From electronic sensors to the medical devices in my own home, rising costs are hitting everywhere, and it is ordinary workers like him who feel the brunt most acutely." For New York jewelers, the squeeze is even tighter. The U.S. Jewelry Council reported that wholesale prices for engagement rings and watches have jumped about 11% in just 1 week. Retailers now face a stark choice: absorb the losses or pass the added costs on to customers. Inside American politics, fierce debate has erupted. Trump supporters argue that the tariff is a strategic move designed to reduce reliance on foreign gold refineries and strengthen Washington's hand at the negotiating table. Senator Josh Hawley even published a lengthy post on social media, accusing Switzerland of profiting excessively while America's own refining capacity was left underdeveloped. To the pro-tariff camp, this is about jobs, sovereignty, and fairness. Opponents, however, warn of dire consequences. Senator Elizabeth Warren emphasized that taxing gold will not create jobs, but instead make life harder for families, burden small businesses with higher costs, and destabilize an already fragile financial system. Beyond political sparring, the markets have begun reacting in chain. Within 2 days, silver futures rose 4%, while copper prices on the London Metal Exchange climbed 2.7%, amid fears of a spillover effect. Analysts at Bloomberg Intelligence cautioned that this move could pave the way for similar measures targeting lithium, rare earths, or other strategic materials, sectors where Canada and the European Union are deeply embedded in U.S. supply chains. As of August 17th, U.S. Department of Commerce data showed that gold imports from Europe had plunged by 92% compared to the average of the first half of the year. For many American industries, this is no longer just a story about commodities, but the making of a potential crisis. The Consumer Technology Association warned that rising costs could add roughly $1.4 billion U.S. in annual expenses to the electronics sector. Meanwhile, the U.S. Medical Device Alliance projected that the price of implants containing gold components could increase by as much as 15%. In Ottawa, Canadian leaders are watching closely and drawing their own lessons. Prime Minister Mark Carney stressed that Switzerland's experience shows any sector with a trade surplus can become a target once the U.S. uses its trade balance as a guiding principle. "We need to anticipate and prepare," he warned. In Ontario, Premier Doug Ford put hard numbers on the table, citing the billions of dollars in losses already suffered by Canada's steel and aluminium industries. 2 different approaches, one diplomatic and cautious, the other blunt in public, but both complementary. For Canada, the gold tariff saga is no longer just a European event observed from afar. It is a direct warning signal. What this makes clear is that a single customs directive can unravel decades-old trade flows in an instant. Industries once considered safe are now under threat in Ottawa and in boardrooms across the country. The impact on Canada's energy, automotive, and critical mineral sectors has become a central concern. Meanwhile, major American corporations from automakers to tech giants are reporting billions in losses from the tariffs, wiping out years of restructuring gains. Retailers have been the first to pass costs down to consumers. Walmart and Best Buy have confirmed price hikes on a wide range of goods from shampoo to shoes. A Reuters survey recorded at least 37 price increases in July and early August, all directly tied to tariffs. A single mother in Dallas complained to NBC News that her weekly grocery bill has gone up by nearly $40 US since June. They talk about fair trade, but for me that just means choosing between fresh fruit or filling up the car. She said even the morning cup of coffee is becoming a luxury. The U.S. imports roughly one-third of its coffee from Brazil, but as of August 1st, South American agricultural tariffs have been expanded. Rabobank projects that wholesale coffee prices in the U.S. could climb another 15 to 20% by the end of September. In Chicago, the owner of a small chain of 3 cafes admitted, "We've tried to hold the line, but if coffee keeps climbing, a latte will have to go from $4 to $5. Customers will notice every morning." But the next wave is not just about coffee or consumer goods. It strikes at the heart of industry. Canada's energy exports have fallen nearly 20%, hitting Alberta the hardest and rippling through oil towns already familiar with volatility. And that's not all. Exports of auto parts and consumer goods, the backbone of cross-border trade, have also slumped sharply, with some car components down as much as 14% from a year earlier. In Windsor and Oshawa, small manufacturers are warning of looming layoffs if conditions don't improve. One business owner supplying parts to GM and Ford told the Toronto Star, "When they get hit with tariffs, we take the blow too. If this drags into the fall, I'll be forced to lay off at least 60 workers." Ottawa has opted for restraint. Instead of retaliating with new tariffs, Prime Minister Carney is pursuing a repositioning strategy. The message is clear. Retaliation may soothe in the short term, but only market diversification can build lasting resilience. Last week, Finance Minister Francis-Philippe Champagne and Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand traveled to Mexico City to meet President Claudia Sheinbaum, reaffirming Canada's commitment to expand North American cooperation beyond Washington's influence. The visit carried deep symbolism. Just a year ago, some Canadian officials had floated the idea of excluding Mexico from future trade talks. Now, with the 2026 USMCA review on the horizon, both Ottawa and Mexico see standing together as essential. Trump has taken a different path, consistently favoring bilateral deals, especially with Mexico. He has even delayed additional tariffs on Mexico for 90 days while refusing to offer the same to Canada. For Ottawa, this disparity cannot be ignored. Trade expert Meredith Lilly of the University of Toronto noted that Canada must build Mexico up as a partner, not a rival, if it hopes to maintain leverage in the upcoming negotiations. Against this backdrop, Canadian small and medium-sized businesses are beginning to pivot toward Mexico, treating diversification as a survival strategy. Meanwhile, in the United States, the damage from tariffs is already measurable. The U.S. Department of Labor reported that by mid-January, the manufacturing sector had lost between 32,000 and 41,000 jobs in just 4 months, concentrated in auto supply chains, consumer goods, and small machinery. Experts warned the situation could worsen if new tariffs on pharmaceuticals and consumer products are rolled out in September. Mark Zandandi of Moody's Analytics told CNN, "Tariffs are no longer a theoretical concept. They're slowing growth, killing jobs, and eroding purchasing power." Day by day, the contrast between the two leaders is becoming increasingly clear. Trump opts for direct confrontation, imposing steep tariffs, delivering immediate shocks to force concessions. Carney, by contrast, is more patient, building alliances, broadening markets, and shielding sensitive sectors. The result is a two-sided picture. While American consumers are bearing the costs, from their morning coffee to auto parts, Canada is positioning itself to endure by relying on adaptability rather than political grandstanding. For ordinary Americans, however, resilience is much harder. In Detroit, a factory worker told the Wall Street Journal, "They promised tariffs would bring jobs, but all I got was a pink slip." In Houston, a coffee shop owner complained, "I sell coffee, not politics, yet every week I pay more because of tariffs." In Des Moines, a soybean farmer worried, "If they can tax gold, then they can tax anything." The message is clear. Everything is a target. What was once seen as a foreign policy tool is now eroding corporate profits, draining household budgets, and undermining job security. For Canada, it is a reminder that preparation and adaptability are the only path forward. For the United States, even as markets are still adjusting to the new reality, Washington is already opening a new front, this time in pharmaceuticals, where the risks are far greater. The tariff storm, which began with gold and spread to autos and coffee, has now reached pharmaceuticals, the most sensitive sector of all.
On August 15th, President Trump unveiled a phased tariff plan starting modestly, but set to climb to 150% within 80 months and potentially hitting 250% by 2027, the White House argued. This was the way to bring drug manufacturing back to America and secure medical sovereignty. But global reactions pointed to the risk of crisis. Just weeks after signing a new trade framework with Washington, Europe was blindsided with a 15% tariff on medicines exported to the U.S. The EU supplies nearly 20% of branded drugs, including cutting-edge cancer treatments. India, a major source of generics and pharmaceutical ingredients, was also targeted, while Canada, though not on the initial list, is deeply tied into the U.S. pharma supply chain. Ottawa both exports billions in generic drugs and imports patented medicines. The Trump administration has imposed a most favored nation pricing rule, meaning U.S. drug prices cannot exceed GDP-adjusted prices in any other country. Since Canadian drug prices are typically 45 to 50% lower, the clear risk is that costs here will be pushed upward. This could place immense pressure on provincial healthcare budgets. Ontario Health Minister Sylvia Jones warned the new policy could add $1.3 billion annually to drug costs. The issue, she stressed, is not just profit margins, but access. A cancer patient in BC voiced fears, "If prices rise further, will I still get treatment?" Within the industry, reactions are divided. Eli Lilly and Johnson & Johnson have pledged to invest in U.S. production, but analysts point out that building new, compliant facilities could take 3 to 5 years and cost billions. In the meantime, the burden falls on patients and insurers. Higher copays, rising premiums, and narrower drug formularies in Minneapolis. A distributor reported having to renegotiate contracts multiple times in a single quarter due to soaring costs, raising fears that smaller hospitals could be priced out. In Montreal, a biotech startup warned that if access to cheap compounds is disrupted, research and clinical trials will stall. The WHO also raised concerns. Nearly 60% of pharmaceutical ingredients come from India and China, most finished in Europe and Canada. Coordinated tariffs could disrupt global drug supply, and even a small delay is enough to cause life-saving medicines to run short. In reality, these measures are running counter to the goal of lowering drug prices. According to the Kaiser Family Foundation, out-of-pocket spending on prescription drugs in the United States has risen 12% since April, with insurers warning that premiums could climb by double digits in 2026. Senator Amy Klobuchar criticized UK-UN reduced drug prices by raising costs across the supply chain. This is a dangerous experiment with the health of millions of Americans. In Europe, trust in the US is faltering. The pharmaceutical tariffs were introduced only weeks after Trump signed a new trade deal that promised tariff stability in exchange for energy imports. Now, EU officials are openly questioning the value of that agreement, while pressure for retaliation is mounting. A European Parliament member asked, if the US can break its commitments on healthcare, then what is safe? In the United States, the consequences are already visible in daily life. A diabetes patient in Ohio said their insulin costs rose from $130 to $165 in July. In Florida, a retiree is paying an extra $50 for arthritis medication. While in California, pharmacists have reported patients beginning to cut back on their dosages. As predicted, the heaviest burden of tariffs is not felt at the negotiating table, but at the family dinner table. The business community is also voicing concern. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce warned the policy could cost 90,000 jobs over 2 years as companies are forced to restructure. The Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America stressed that forcing production to return home to quickly risks reducing R&D investment and stifling innovation. Yet, the White House remains unyielding. Trump insists that the pain is temporary and has promised that within 2 years, the U.S. will end its reliance on foreign drugs. Analysts, however, argue this timeline is unrealistic. Building plants, securing FDA approvals, and training a workforce takes years, not months. Until then, economic, political, and healthcare costs will continue to climb. If drug shortages and runaway prices spiral out of control, the tariff gamble will no longer be seen as a victory for economic nationalism, but as a grave risk to public health. As one healthcare expert told CNBC, you can't tariff your way to a healthy nation. Still, the White House has shown no signs of backing down. What began with gold, then spread to autos and consumer goods, has now penetrated the most private corner of every household, the medicine cabinet. Meanwhile, in Washington, rumors are swirling that the next targets could be agricultural subsidies and food imports. If that scenario unfolds, the tariff confrontation will not only rattle markets and major industries, but directly touch every American meal. The question now is clear. How far will this trade war go, and who will bear the consequences?